If you have children, know children, or have ever been a child, you're going to want to stay tuned for this episode of the Movement, the podcast for people who want to know the truth about what it takes to have a happy, healthy, strong body, starting feet first, because those things are your foundation, where we're breaking down the propaganda, the mythology, sometimes the outright lies you've been told about what it takes to walk, run, hike, play, do yoga, CrossFit, Dance Revolution, eSIM racing, whatever it is you like to do, and to do it effectively and efficiently and enjoyably. And did I mention effectively? Trick question. I know I did. Because if you're not having fun, you're not going to keep it up anyway. So make sure you're having a good time. I'm Stephen Sashen from ZeroShoes.com, your host of the podcast. We call it the Movement because we are creating a movement, and I'll talk about that we part in a second, about natural movement, letting your body do what bodies are made to do, not getting in the way of that. And the way we can be the we part, it's really simple. Go to www.jointhemovementmovement.com. You don't need to do anything to join. It's just the domain that I got. You'll find the previous episodes. You'll find the ways you can engage with us on social media, and you will find how you can be part of the tribe. Basically, subscribe, like, leave reviews, thumbs up, hit the bell icon on YouTube. The gist, if you want to be part of the tribe, just subscribe. Okay, Brian, welcome. First of all, wait, it's very rare that someone actually comes into the office to do this. So, and I didn't actually expect that Brian was going to be live and in person, but here we are. So tell people who you are and what you do, and then we will jump into why you're here.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Well, first of all, I appreciate your ability to improvise and adapt when you saw me walking in the door. Like, people don't usually just show up. So glad we made this happen. So I'm Brian Osuna. The way that we met is because I own a company called Committed HP that creates and sells portable, affordable. Oh, so
I have something over there. Wait, all right, you keep talking. I'm going to go get it.
And versatile fitness tools to inspire people and empower people to move and take care of themselves anywhere and anytime.
I'm back. All right, I'm not going to show this now. We'll come to that later. But I was not prepared well enough for your physical presence, so this was not at my fingertips. Now, the intro to this episode is if you have kids, no kids, or have ever been a kid. Mm-hmm. So I know that this is something that is particularly interesting to you. First of all, you just had a baby. Mm-hmm. More accurately, your wife just had a baby and you just watched. So talk to me about the fundamental thing before we get into like the specifics about kids and natural movement. What is it that got you interested in that to begin with?
Well, before I had kids and before kids were even a thought, I've done just like a lot of exploration around what kind of movement works best for me and what kind of movement is most useful for my clients. So I was a personal trainer and coach for 13 years. I still do a little bit of that, transitioning more into transformational coaching with people, but still definitely deeply invested in movement. And I think it was Tim Cook, I believe, who kind of planted this idea of looking at the developmental stages of children and kind of using that to reverse engineer, kind of like almost just help people heal their biomechanics and movement. And so that really got me thinking about how children develop. What are the macro movement patterns and kind of like the macro patterns that children just naturally start doing, and looking at how we get separated from that and just reintroducing it into our lives.
So can you talk about those different patterns, those different stages?
Sure. They don't seem to always happen in the exact same chronological order, but right out the womb.
Well, that's because some children are time travelers.
Exactly.
So, I mean, that's obvious. So anyway.
I love it. So breathing is the first one. I remember when my first child, Liam, came out and laid him on my chest, and someone said, "You breathing right teaches him how to breathe right." So children's breathing, when they come out, it's very chaotic. There's not a ton of rhythm to it. So they're literally learning how to breathe. So that diaphragm does naturally kick in with children, but breathing is the first movement pattern.
Well, so let's dive into that a little more, because I know there's, I don't remember the name of the guy. He's Czech, who has this whole thing about breathing and about 360-degree breathing. So it's not just what most people think of as belly breathing. It's just expanding your abdomen, but instead of just getting all of those parts to expand. And I just blanked on Aaron's last name, who was on the podcast, because I'm horrible with names.
Alexander?
No. Anyway, she developed a product called the Core 360 belt. That's just to cue you for that breathing. So do you want to talk about that and how that does something?
Sure.
It's a Monday. I can't speak English.
It's Monday.
Yeah.
Here we are. We'll make it work. Yeah, there is this misconception of proper breathing being into your belly.
Right.
What I perceive and what I've learned is learning to breathe into your belly is a way to help you learn how to regulate, right? Regulate your nervous system, regulate your physical tension. So when you're directing your breath into your belly, it's helping you regulate versus just optimal breathing is just optimizing the amount that you can bring air in and out and creating space for breath and using the right muscles and biomechanics for that. So mainly your diaphragm and your intercostal muscles are what you're trying to work or utilize when for proper breathing, just on everyday situations or for performance. And that breath is lateral and posterior. So your rib cage is actually stretching to the side and up and back. And then after that, you have accessory breathing muscles, which create even more space and assistance by pulling up. And those start kicking in as you start to get fatigued or you need more air moving in and out. But just on an everyday level right now, if we're not too stressed out or we're not stressed, we're not doing anything intense, our diaphragm and intercostal should be just creating that natural airflow.
I found that when I started playing with this idea, and it's something I'm still exploring and it's still expanding, pun intended, is that I had to really work to find how to let those intercostals, let things expand sideways and backwards. And my favorite thing is when I do, I've had sort of chronic tension, like right in between my shoulders, and I can feel that stretching as well, even though that's not what the breath is doing.
Right.
But and I think about babies whenever I do this, because they haven't developed that chronic tension that gets in the way of doing this. And so kind of coming back, like you were mentioning before, sort of reversing time developmentally to kind of find that again is very interesting. What did you notice when you put your baby on your chest and found your breathing? Did you notice that you were doing something awry, or were you just like brilliant and just, teaching that to the kid?
You're saying when I started reflecting on how I was breathing, if I noticed anything?
If how you breathe is going to teach your child how to breathe, what did you notice about your breathing at that time?
I did notice that my go-to when I think about it is a belly breath. But when I just relax and let my body just take over, my intercostals and my diaphragm kind of do the right thing. So I've kind of conditioned myself to kind of belly breath consciously, but luckily my body kind of knows the right way. So I did notice that, like, if I just let my mind go to something else and then I tuned into my breathing without trying, I was kind of using that correct expansion of the rib cage versus when I was thinking about breathing, then I'd start like directing it into the belly, which isn't a bad thing, but really we want to get back to that diaphragm.
So if that breathing thing is our first stage, what follows that?
Typically, the way that I saw it, and we can talk about reaching and articulating with the limbs. The main thing I saw was posturing and specifically engaging and articulating the spine, right? So being able to lift the head and then start to like posture up the spine, either from the belly or, if I was holding the child, being able to just like move and keep the spine erect. Yeah.
And so I'm trying to think of then again, for us adults who are thinking about going back in time and experimenting with these sort of developmental stages to see what we learn, how does that apply to those of us who are no longer babies?
So I guess just engaging with your spine and posture in a way that's allowing you to have a dynamic and strong spine, but also what a neutral spine actually is actually including the curves of the spine. So a lot of people think straight spine, and that's a good cue for when we're like trying to do something. But in a natural state, like a neutral spine is a somewhat relaxed spine with the natural curves, and then being able to move and articulate from that place. And what we see a lot, especially when people have spent a lot of time in flexion, is they've lost that neutral spine. And now they're moving and they're initiating so much movement from a flex place, which then compromises their breathing. Right. And then it compromises the structures of their spine and it compromises their movement. And so the first thing is like helping people almost do kinds of stuff that babies would do, almost like from like a cobra or a prone position on their stomach and starting to articulate and activate some of the paraspinal muscles that have gotten weak, just so they can actually be in a neutral spine with ease.
So do you want to describe what some of those exercises are or those movement patterns are? So you started saying you're
Yes,
lying on the ground on your belly.
Something could be as simple as lying face down with your forehead kind of touching the ground and retracting your head. So there's a difference between extending the spine and then retracting is where if you have a laser pointer coming out of your nose, that laser pointer staying on the same point on the ground, but you're pulling your head off the ground, right? So there's a glide function of the spine as opposed to
just tilting your head up.
So trying to restore that is a huge thing. Exercises like bird dogs, where you're on hands and knees and getting you're going through flexion and extension at the hips and the shoulders. So then you're adding some balance and activating some different muscles in addition to those paraspinals. I believe they're multifidi.
Yep.
So really starting to just wake those muscles up that have kind of just given up and turned off because we spent so much time just hanging on here, and then getting that ability to retract, which even just when you do that, you start to feel those mid-thoracic muscles, muscles like your rhomboids and your trapezius as well starting to kick in. And once those get stronger and more tone, you're going to be able to stay in neutral a little bit better.
I noticed gymnasts are very interesting that way. So those muscles that we're talking about have problems, not because they've given up, but because the most important movements in gymnastics are all like, pulling into the front of your body. And so gymnasts all look like their chest is kind of caved in because that's just a really important movement. And then there's a lot of tension in the lower back as well. And all gymnasts have messed up shoulders after they're done. In fact, I just had literally right before I got here, had an injection in my bicep tendon because old gymnastics thing. I noticed that if I was just doing things like scapular retraction, just pulling your shoulder blades back and down, if you're doing that with resistance or whatever, never really did a lot for me. But one day, Lane and I moved into a place and I put a chin-up bar. We had our second bedroom was where we had our television. And we had a couch there, television, and bathroom. And so I put a chin-up bar in the doorway to the bathroom. And anytime I went to the bathroom, I would just go and do a couple of pull-ups where I really focused on just that retraction part first before I actually bent my arms. And that made a huge difference for me. And I don't know if it was the angles or whatever it was, but just that, that little bit with like a band or just with nothing doing scapular retractions never made a difference. But that was really helpful. And I refer to that as trying to get the gymnast out of my body, like to get, that seeming contraction in the upper body out and turn that into something, again, more neutral versus someone that I knew who was in the Navy and they're constantly saying, pull your shoulders down, put your chest out. And he walked like a peacock all the time because everything was so out of whack. And we were kids when I met this guy. We teased him mercilessly, of course, because we were children. Yeah. But I like this idea of getting back to sort of neutral and movable rather than some imagined position that people often have a misconception about.
I love that too. To just kind of expand on your point with the gymnastics, I wrestled for 15 years.
Oh yeah.
So I have I don't know if any of you have seen wrestling, there's a lot of time in that flexion because it's more of a defensive position if someone's trying to attack you. And did I scoot out of the
Yeah, I'm scooting you back in.
Okay. And then after wrestling, I tried really hard to be good at CrossFit. And because I had spent so much time conditioning my spine into thoracic flexion, I just couldn't put heavy weights over my head as well.
Oh, interesting.
At least that's my excuse.
Yeah, it's important to have an excuse for anytime you find you can't do it. You just have to find an excuse.
The ego needs one.
Yeah, much better.
Had nothing to do with me being 150 pounds, but and then after that, I found Spartan race, which I was much better suited for physically. But I spent a lot of time and a lot with the help of that mobile roller, which I actually created for myself.
Okay. Come on, product plug. Let me pull it out of the box. So here, as I'm pulling out of the box, say more about how and why you created this.
Yeah.
Of course, now I got to figure out how to open the damn box. There we go.
After wrestling, I was pretty much a mess in many different ways, but mainly physically. The most screamingly obvious issue was my neck, just severe neck pain. But after 20 different professionals telling me it's actually not your neck, it's actually your thoracic spine. And your neck's trying to figure out how to move now because your thoracic spine is such a mess. I was like, okay, well, I need to fix my thoracic spine. And it was at the same time I was learning about self-myofascial release. I was the guy with all of the foam rolling tools in the gym. So a whole bag, I had the regular foam roller, I had the 2 tennis balls taped together, I had the lacrosse ball, I had the orb, which was it was like pretty firm foam ball about this big. And I would just rotate between them all. And finally I was like, I need one thing, if it exists, and it didn't exist. So I made that.
Dun, 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 dun. For people not watching, here, I'll let you describe this because I can think of a number of ways of describing it that are not politically correct. So here, I will let you hold and describe. And for people who are watching, this will be screamingly obvious because, you're looking at it.
A huge reason it got popular is because of all the political incorrectness that came with it. I usually didn't say anything. I just smiled and said, any publicity is good publicity. But
look, I have no problem being politically incorrect, but it's more fun if someone else is doing it rather than just me. I mean, look, if I wanted the CEO of this company, I'd be fired for an HR violation a couple of times a day. So I just say things that, it's appropriately not appropriate for work. I don't know what that means. I mean, I treat everyone like they're friends.
Let's go back to the prototype and the first few models. These balls were blue. So the jokes were infinite.
Okay. So to be clear, we have a stick with 2 balls on it that are, like the size of a softball.
Yep.
And there's more to it than that. But they're red. But yes, if they were 2 big blue balls, I don't need to do the jokes. I think everyone else can do them pretty effortlessly.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
here, all right. So I'm going to do it. The issue is you can use this as long as you want, but you never feel totally satisfied.
What's that?
If you can use this as much as you want, but you never felt totally satisfied when the balls were blue.
This is true.
Yeah.
There's something missing.
Okay.
Okay. So we have dense, resilient foam balls, similar give as a lacrosse ball, but a little bit more of that memory foam-esque give. So 2 balls, and they're kind of impaled by a stick, which is also wrapped in a foam. So these balls adjust out. So the initial idea came from the 2 tennis balls taped together,
right,
which seemed conceptually to be awesome, but pressed on my spine and also didn't get a lot of the locations on my body that I wanted. So I just wanted the function of being able to adjust the balls out. And then I played with the ball sizes, and it seemed like in between a lacrosse ball and a softball was like the sweet spot that got like 95% of what we needed to do. So that's about the sizing of the balls, just a little bit smaller than a softball. And they adjust out in width. So if you want them all the way together, that's great for getting the muscles right next to the spine. It's also great for putting your calf on. Then you have either side of the gastrocnemius. So for those of you that don't know, the main muscle in your calf is the gastrocnemius, and it's split into 2. Similar concept.
Deliberately. That's the way they come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Similar concept with the hamstring. Or if you want to be more efficient in getting 2 sides of the body, you can space the balls out. Now you sit your butt on there, you get both sides of the glutes. You can do both sides of the hamstrings, all kinds of things. The stick is padded, so throwing your foot on there is really great for just getting the foot the first thing in the morning, or you can hold the stick like this, put it behind you, and now I can just sit here and just kind of manipulate it around or move it around with the handle. So that's the short and sweet, but the cool thing is giving it to someone who's been a massage therapist for like 40 years and be like, show me all your creativity. And they're always like, people come up with stuff that even I haven't thought of.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So, all right, we'll come back to that. So, all right, this was a bit of a tangent from stages, and we went into neutral spine, and that led to stories about your back, your neck, et cetera. So where are we next in the stage development, change, whatever the word is I'm looking for? Again, Monday. Can't think of words.
Monday.
Yeah.
So your excuse is Monday. My excuse is 2 kids.
Oh, yeah. And I will say that it's Monday on any day of the week if I have to.
Yeah.
So
having 2 kids and being home with them all the time every day is just, it's all a blur. Like you don't look at the calendar until you have a meeting with someone. And
yeah.
Luckily you make it.
And then you show up at their office unexpectedly.
Yeah.
I think that's a great plan. Yeah.
Keep people on their toes. So after posturing would be crawling. crawling. So, crawling can start emerging in a lot of different ways. My first son did more of like an army crawl at first. So that was fun to see because that wasn't something that I had really thought up, at least when I was like exploring this process without having a kid.
Right.
But then army crawling came in. But just starting to look at like contralateral coordination. That's just coordinating like your right hand with your left leg and vice versa. And starting to engage some of those fascial slings and different things that allow you to do kind of more full body dynamic movement patterns. And then you're reinforcing that posture that you've developed and starting to engage your senses a lot more because now you're moving around.
And again, so for adults, we're going back to this stage. What does that look like?
So that bird dog is a great segue because then you're being able to kind of balance and engage on arm and opposite leg.
So to describe that, here, I'll let you do it.
So you're on hands and knees.
Oh, by the way, I could have done this. I actually could, but I'm letting you do it.
You could have done it.
Well, I could have done the description, but this is one of those things where it could have sounded like I was handing it off to you because I didn't know how, but I could have done this. I'm just letting you know.
We don't have a little cartoon we can put in there of you?
Anything of me is a cartoon, but no. So back to your description.
So arm and opposite leg are going to be coming off the ground at the same time and the same rate. So on all fours. On all fours.
Knees and toes on the ground, hands on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
So arms basically going up in the air to horizontal, in parallel with the spine. And then the opposite leg is basically doing the same at the same time. And that's starting to develop certain muscles that are important for these contralateral movements, right? The arm and opposite leg. So now you're stabilizing on the arm and opposite leg that's on the ground. And so that's a really great exercise. And then literally just getting people to initially shuffle. So as opposed to like a beast or a bear crawl where your knees are off the ground and you're then having to support yourself additionally more on the limbs they're touching or the points they're touching. First, just getting people to coordinate right arm, left leg sliding forward like a shuffle, and then left arm, right leg. So they're almost just like shuffling, baby shuffling. And then once they can do that, knees are off the ground. You can try that with your knees like hovering off the ground, or you can kind of stick your butt high into the air, kind of more like a bear crawl.
Right.
Honestly, trying to get people to have fun with it is really more important to me than like being super strict about doing it perfectly. But if we can start to see like a kind of a natural, like that, like again, that word contralateral pattern just kind of emerging, or at least like a really balanced, natural way to move around on hands and feet or hands and knees. That's the main thing we're looking at. And then with that starts, the tissue is going to have to adapt. Oftentimes your toes are tucked under. Oftentimes the hips, the wrists, those types of things that are in new positions are having to stretch a little bit. And sometimes that's something we have to readapt to.
So I have the sense that we're eventually going to get to standing. What's in between here and there, if anything?
Getting up.
Getting up. All right. Let's talk about getting up.
So, I tell people just spend more time on the ground, like period. Because naturally, hopefully, if you spend more time on the ground, you're getting up and down more.
One would hope.
But sometimes you do have to teach people that part as well. But I believe there's some research actually done on your ability to get up and down off the ground. Once you lose that, your likelihood of early age mortality, or just your time span, your lifespan from that point where you lose it goes down dramatically.
There are a couple. One is your ability to get up. It's not even getting up and down. It's getting up and down without your hands. It's even a bigger one. And similarly, walking speed. If you, I don't remember what the threshold is, but if you're walking at something slower than fill in the blank, I don't know what it is, then the probability that you'll be dead within 5 years is through the roof. Yeah. And I would contend that a lot of that happens because people have been either wearing shoes for a long time and don't have much feedback from their feet to their brain and back. But then as they start to lose that, then people, dumb doctors, not that saying all doctors are dumb, but the dumb ones will put them in even bigger, thicker, stiffer shoes. And so they're just shuffling because they're trying to make sure they stay balanced. And the irony is that makes them less balanced. So I think there's some research going on right now that happily they're using our shoes that might demonstrate an alternative that would be that would save insurance companies billions of dollars and keep people from dying excessively prematurely. So fingers crossed on that. So.
Yeah, the third one that I definitely heard about.
Pause 1 sec. So for anyone, good time out. For anyone who is thinking about this whole, getting up and down thing, especially with no hands, the other fun thing to do is see how many different ways you can do it.
I love that.
Yeah, and that one's a blast. And I'm trying to think if I want to give any hints about ways to explore that. The obvious one, because our eyes are in front of our head, the obvious thing we do is always forward. So let's just say if that's the obvious thing, what other directions can you explore to get up and down from?
You want to get really creative with it?
Oh, yeah. Let me hear it.
Well, when I was playing with this, I definitely practiced. So I always tried to start from the same position. So,
which is what?
Just seated with my legs crossed.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I can uncross from there, but rolling over my shoulder, kind of if you're familiar with ukemi, which is the art of falling, which incorporates a lot of rolling. Kind of parkour is largely based on ukemi. But so kind of doing a reverse ukemi roll over my shoulder and then using that momentum to get up.
Yep.
Another would be kind of doing a gymnastics hollow body rock back and then using that momentum forward. And from that one, you can get up 6 different ways, depending on how you plant your feet. You can do a symmetrical squat. You can do lay your on the side of your one leg. You can even go into a cross leg and spin up, spiral up. So there's all kinds of fun ways, but usually the easiest is to just lay one leg down on its side from that kind of momentum part. And then the other leg plants foot flat and drives up kind of into a lunge, kind of a modified lunge. So that's a fun one, to just play around with, to see how many different ways.
Okay, here's one.
Yeah.
So when I was somewhere where they came up with this experiment, and the thing that I always do is I try to look for the thing that no one's doing. So I don't remember what it was, but it was some class where it's figure out how many ways you could do whatever. And I realized that no one had left the room. So I just literally walked out the room and did whatever it was. But in this one, so you're sitting down and then you kind of roll over. So your face towards the ground, put your head on the ground and then scoot your knees and your feet up. And so your head's on the ground for as long as you can, and then roll back to squatting. So it's just using your head as a third point of contact, which I didn't see anyone using their head. So I went, let's try that one.
Should we make a video later about all the ridiculous ways you can get up?
Hey, they're not ridiculous. These are things that will keep you from dying. We've already established that.
Fun.
They are fun. It's entertaining. It's I talk about this a lot. I always think about any pattern that I have. How can I try something different? So if you put your pants on left leg first, try right leg first. If you brush your teeth with your right hand, try using your left hand. There's some things that I'm, again, HR violation, not allowed to say, but that's the gist. I always like to see what things are habitual and then try to mess with that. All right. So we've gotten up, or are we still getting up?
We're in the process of getting up.
Okay.
Another tangent that we can go on another time, because I know we have limited time, but
time is infinite.
Is just, now that I have kids, is almost all of my natural, not all, but the majority of my natural movement practice is legitimate play. And something never resonated with me when I would go to gyms that were movement culture gyms. I absolutely loved the style of movement, but so often they were so serious. We have to
this.
We have to train these ways, and it's in serious face. And there's so many teachers and modalities out there that teach amazing and beautiful movement, but they're so serious. And I just now that I have kids, I try to be as ridiculous and silly and laughy when I'm doing my movement. But I'll do my flips, handstands, rolls, all of my monkey ape stuff with my kids. And that's truly the best way to do it now, that I realize it. But taking movement too seriously is something that I did for way too long. And now I'm trying to have a blast with it.
I was at an event a couple of years ago for footwear CEOs, and it was an all-day event. And by like 4 p.m, it was all I could do not to yell, "They're just shoes, people." Now, granted, we think what we do is life-changing, but what they were doing, they were acting like this was going to save the world if they decided to take an elevated heel and make it a half an inch bigger, or, have some other color pattern that was like, you guys are taking yourself way too seriously. Yeah, it happens in many places. I was at this event a couple of weeks ago, and maybe I was just lucky. I ended up at a table with people who did not take any of it at all seriously. And in fact, here, I'll give you this story. At dinner at the end of the event, Tommy Hilfiger and his wife, Dee, did a little talk while we were having our salad. And it was all kind of silly, and we were teasing them a little, just at our own table. And then I thought of the perfect question to ask, and the mic did not come to me, but accidentally, as I went to the bathroom, I bumped into Tommy Hilfiger, and I said, "Hey, I got a quick question for you. And if your answer is yes, I promise I won't tell anyone." And he goes, "Oh, what's that?" I go, "Do you ever just slip into a pair of JCPenney sweats and a hoodie?" He just goes, "No," and walked away. I just had to. It was way too much fun.
Secret. He was like,
I got him. Definitely a question no one had ever asked him before.
Love it.
All right. So are we still getting up, or are we
getting up?
Okay.
We can say we're up.
All right.
Let's be up, because getting up can be self-explanatory, but in terms of reintegrating it, the main things you want to look at is hip mobility. If you have significantly compromised hip mobility, you're going to only be able to get up a few certain ways, which it's going to be a little bit ugly. Leg strength. I'm totally blanking on. Oh, and balance. Yeah. Those are kind of the three things that often get lost that we need to reintroduce for getting up.
So how would someone know if they have lost hip mobility?
There's certain tests. I mean, a squat assessment test is a really easy one to start with, to kind of see, especially with like the internal external rotation of the hips, to kind of see if their limited internal or external rotation is compromising how they squat, or is it making them squat differently. This is something I haven't done in a really long time. So I would have to kind of like poke around at it a bit to remember, but a squat assessment is something I used to use. And then there's manual ways where you can check.
So backing up on the squat part.
Sure.
So simplest instructions for someone to play with, experiment with, what would you say?
The simplest?
Yeah.
Well, I guess just videotaping themselves squat.
And describe how you want them to, what you hope to see, or what you would, if they're squatting well versus squatting badly and have limited hip mobility.
Well, videotape yourself from the front and the side. As your butt's getting down to about the level of your knees, oftentimes what you're going to see is you basically just start flexing your spine forward. And if your hips don't have good enough internal rotation, your basically hips are going to stop flexing, or they're going to start deviating in a certain direction. Usually, let's see, I guess that would be out if there's limited internal rotation.
Well, so in other words, so that if I can do a little translation to English for some people, once your hips get a little past the level of your knees, you might start seeing that your knees start to cave in, your knees start to go out. You might feel some tension in your feet wanting to go in or out. Right. All of these. And by the way, when you start the squat, where do you want your feet to be?
For the test?
Yeah.
I believe it's parallel at shoulder width. Okay. That's something I haven't done in a really long time.
That's okay. But that's an interesting thing to experiment with, to see what happens if they're in that position, or if your feet are a little wider and pointed out, or even pointed in. So all of these, I can imagine, are things that would, if you start to feel something where you can't get like ass to the grass, then you've got something going on with hip mobility.
Yeah. It's either going to be hip or ankle. Right.
Yeah.
So very often people will feel like a literal like pinch or like stop, like locking sensation in their hips, and they try to continue the squat by dropping like their head in their upper body. And so you'll see them start to go into spinal flexion, thinking that they're going lower into a squat, but their butt's not actually going lower. So people with ankle restriction, you'll see that their knees won't progress any further forward, and then they kind of start sitting back and similar stuff starts happening. But usually you can tell that it's because their knees aren't able to go forward anymore without their heels coming off the ground. So from there, if you can't tell if it's your ankle or hips, there's other ways to kind of play around with that. You can do like an ankle mobility test. But long story short, hip mobility is something that a lot of people lose as they get older, and it's really important for that kind of functional movement of getting up and down.
Dude, I'm hanging out with a sprinting coach who I really like, who mostly deals with high school kids and college kids, and he has some hip mobility tests that many of them are failing. So you don't have to be that old to have this become problematic.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that people don't realize about sport that requires specific adaptation. Sometimes, it's a beautiful sport, but people aren't getting taught how to then take care of their body after they have these very specific adaptations over decades, like a pitcher, a sprinter who's really refining and optimizing power through a very specific range of motion and not using more. And I think there's a lot more awareness to it now. And I think a really good strength and conditioning coach is aware of that and can help kind of minimize the risk of injury. But that's something that, one of many things I did not get taught as a high level athlete, that when you're done, you're going to want to take care of your body and help return your body to these natural ways of moving, which I luckily figured out on my own.
There's a guy, another sprinting coach that I know, his whole theory about the weight room is you're not using the weight room to get stronger as a sprinter. You're using the weight room to get things back in place that you got all out of whack when you were sprinting.
Yeah.
He was like, that's clever.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. But I love that concept of, creating extra range and space so that you don't hit your limitations, right? During your sport.
Okay, so we're standing up. We talked about hip mobility. What was next?
I haven't heard other people look at it this way, but I really like to look at the actual process of getting back down, right? And one I included in that is jumping off of things, because very often we see kids jump off of things before jumping on.
Well, definitely, because as soon as you said kids jumping off of things, I had flashbacks to what I did, where I could easily jump off of this thing. But if I could jump onto my 10-foot roof, that would have been miraculous.
Yes.
But I remember bringing the dirty laundry out, making a pile of dirty laundry, climbing onto the roof and jumping off the roof.
Amazing. And then we were just talking about stuff like that this morning with my friends about, what we used to do as kids that kids don't really do anymore, or that, parents don't let their kids do. And I haven't come to any conclusions. It'll be kind of like, we'll see what happens, but there's definitely some things that really allowed us to become resilient and robust that we did. And then there's other things I'm sure that were just downright stupid.
I used to climb the trees in my backyard. They were 70 feet high. Yeah. And my parents did not approve. So I did it when they weren't home.
Yep.
So getting back down. So let's talk about the ways of doing that. Now, you just got a baby. We just got a dog a year ago. And my favorite thing is watching his usual way of getting down, which is just falling over, because he's not very high off the ground. So he literally just tips over, which I think is hysterical.
Yeah. So I had initially, speaking of falling over, I had initially theorized like learning how to fall properly was like incorporating that getting back down. I haven't yet seen kids really learn that gracefully yet, but that's something that I think is super valuable.
Yeah.
And there's even a quote, I don't know who said it, is like, the most important thing in life is learning how to fall. And I think that's literally and metaphorically, right? The idea of learning how to fail, learning how to get back up after you fall, or fail in a way that's graceful. Well,
look, you know this from wrestling. I know it from gymnastics. Is the only way you get better is doing it wrong thousands of times. Because you hone in on doing it better, but you also know on those rare times where something goes wrong, you've been there before. Yeah. You know how to adjust or save yourself to the extent that you can. I mean, I had more than my share of times where something went awry and I'm just 10 feet in the air going, I could die when this ends. Well, let's see what happens. So happily, I did not, as far as I can tell. But a lot of it is just doing it wrong over and over and over. And from our gymnastics coach is doing it wrong and not going
Yeah.
because if you do that in some meet when you do it wrong, you'll make those same noises, and that's not good.
Practice how you want to, or practice how you want to compete, right? How
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So so other than just falling over on your side, what do we got?
Getting back down. That's not one that I expanded a lot, but it was an interesting concept because I did notice that there are specific patterns of getting back down, but usually when training it, like making sure that the eccentric phase of like a lunge and a squat has the range of motion and the stability to get you all the way down to the ground. And ultimately, you're looking at a lot of the same stuff as getting up. But there are also a lot of unique and fun ways to get down and to fall. And I'm sure we could do a whole podcast on that. But that's one thing that I firmly believe that giving kids the space and the safety, both physically and kind of emotionally, to explore their bodies, they figure out all this stuff on their own. But that is the one of all of them that I'm in addition to running, where I'm like, a little bit of instruction or a little intervention can be really valuable.
Again, you're giving me flashback after flashback to things I literally haven't thought about in decades. So I got really good at doing stunt falls, where it looked like I tripped on something and then just face planted. And so I'm at an event with a number of friends, and I do one of these, and it's like a convention, and I do one of these, and it just so happened there was like a security guy right next door, or right in front of me, and he's freaking out, thinking that I actually because what I'd do, I'd like fall on my face and then point back at the carpeting as if I had tripped on that thing. And so he freaks out and immediately calls the guys running this event, and they're ready for me to sue the crap out of them because of this thing on the carpet that did not exist. And so I tried to calm them down and tell them it was just a stunt fall, and they really didn't get it. And then we thought, this is a bunch of marketers, we thought we should write a book called Sue and Grow Rich. And it's all like all these fake ways of doing something like that. Not because we believe that you should sue people to get rich, but because we thought if we did it right, we could get on Oprah by taking it seriously. Which I think would have been really fun, but we never pulled it off.
When satire gets taken seriously.
Yeah. Well, there's a guy. Abel is his last name. I can't remember his first name. Alan, maybe. There's a documentary about him. He did a whole thing. He created an organization that was all about putting clothes on animals because they don't like being naked. And people took it totally seriously. And after like 5 years of this, he and the other people doing it went, we can't keep this up. I mean, there's no way out of this. So, but people like completely believed it. So yeah, there's always people who will believe.
I'm probably going to totally butcher this, but I know there was a couple guys that created like almost satire research just to test the peer review process.
Oh yeah.
And like they passed through peer review process
with complete gibberish.
Yeah.
No, there's another one. There's two guys called the Yes Men.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is the first thing they did. No, it's definitely not the first thing they did. One thing they did is they put up a fake World Health Organization website. And then they got invited to come to a talk because someone thought it was a real WHO website. So they did. And it was all like the most ridiculous stuff ever. Yeah. There's a couple of movies from the Yes Men. One of the first things they did is they took a whole bunch of Barbie dolls from a toy store and a whole bunch of talking Barbie dolls and talking G.I. Joe dolls and switched the voice boxes. So Barbie would say, "Let's go," and G.I. Joe would say, "It's time to go shopping." I mean, and they put them back on the shelf and people bought these. I mean, it was just hysterical. So look up the Yes Men would be another opportunity for that.
Beautiful.
All right. We're standing. What else we had?
We got back down. So I incorporated jumping off of things because that specific development of taking on more impact and eccentric load seems to really help develop in a certain way. And it's really awesome because I just watched my son make a quantum leap of like only being able to jump off like low curbs. And within like a span of a week now, he's jumping onto curbs and he's jumping off of like 3-foot high rock.
Oh, wow.
And it's cool to see like both at an actual physical growth level and a developmental level, kids make these quantum leaps. And there was, I heard about this research done where this woman actually showed that kids very often don't grow. And then they make these quantum leaps of like an inch in like a matter of of a day or 2 or 3.
Yeah, to be clear, that didn't happen to you or I.
What? Okay, so I always tell people I was supposed to be between 6'2" and 6'4",
Yeah.
but I lived in the time of low-fat diet,
Uh-huh.
and my mom was all in on it. I did gymnastics and wrestling,
Uh-huh.
and I was definitely supposed to be like 6'1", 6'2".
And you ended up what?
What?
And you ended up where?
Like 5'5" 3/4".
Yeah, I was, I looked at a spinal x-ray recently and I've got a couple of spine things going on. It's like, I did used to be 5'6". Damn it. That's never going to happen again. So yeah, I have no excuse for that. Well, I was a 6-week preemie. That'll be my excuse. And it's Monday. So that's my other excuse for everything.
So here we go. We're
Okay.
back on.
Oh, wait, on jumping though, a thing to pay attention to is, don't jump off something too bigger than you are. And then if you can videotape it, watch what happens to your knees when you land. So, because if your knees cave in, that ain't good. And so that's a thing where when I just see when people are landing, it's like, oh, don't do that. Start lower and pay attention, like get a mirror, watch where your knees are going. You want them to track like parallel or slightly out, depending on what your feet are doing too, because that one could be messy.
Totally. So, I mean, this is where the kind of whole chronological thing it varies.
Right.
So I definitely saw some of Liam's friends or friends of ours who had kids. Like some kids were jumping onto stuff like just after 2, which was mind blowing.
Wow.
And then like Liam is 3.5 and he just started jumping onto stuff. But he developed other things much earlier. And
he's doing your taxes.
He's already better at doing taxes than me, that's for sure. So let's see, where are we?
Standing.
We did getting up and getting down.
Yeah.
So now kind of there's a whole pool of things that happen, like I said, out of in no necessarily chronological order. We're just picking things up. We didn't say walking, of course.
Right.
Walking.
We kind of jumped over balance.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah. And I always went back and forth with like balance. Like what is balance? That's not as much of a motor pattern as it is like a learning of the nervous system, how to equilibrate and adjust. But that's not one that I necessarily included, but it seemed to be essential for pretty much all of these things.
Yeah.
The development of all of these things is learning how to balance. So then walking gait, many of you may know that a walking gait and a running gait is different. So walking is going to come before, and usually kids aren't going to start running. Very often you'll see kids skipping or doing some sort of like gallop thing when they're trying to run before they learn a proper running gait. So we got walking, and then around the similar time, you start seeing them learning to pick things up off the ground. Well, at least stuff with some real weight substance. From standing position, Liam has his own little 9-pound kettlebell, which he loves doing little deadlifts. It's super cute.
Halloween is however many months away. That's the thing I remember about picking stuff up, because the rule was if you can pick it up, you can take it. And so there's all these pictures of me and my sister like going for stuff that is, it looked like a strongman competition in miniature.
Meaning if you can you can literally hold it.
Physically pick it up off the ground and hold it, then you can bring that one home. It was a blast.
So we're talking about pumpkins?
Yeah.
Okay. But at first I thought you were talking about candy. I was like, dear God.
Well, I think there was that too. It's like, if you couldn't carry it, then you couldn't eat it. But no, it's picking up pumpkins.
And that's when you start seeing how creative it can actually be. If you tell them if you can pick it up, then you can have it. And with candy, you'll see some creative stuff.
Well, my creative thing for candy was whenever there was always a house in someone's neighborhood where they said the person there is like a horrible witchy person and they don't like kids or whatever it is, or is down some dark alleyway and no one goes there. It's like, so that's where I went.
Yeah.
And invariably that's where you end up getting a bag full of full-size candy bars because no one showed up.
Yeah.
So
luckily I recently read, and maybe it's not up to date, so I need to read again, but it is an urban legend or a myth that people used to put things in
apples
in apples.
Yeah, completely never happened.
Yeah,
absolutely never happened.
Yeah.
Although I had a joke. This was not for kids. It was an adult joke. It's like I would put out a bag of razor blades and a bag of apples, saying it's a DIY project. So
amazing.
So walking gait, running gait.
Yeah, Yeah, picking things up,
Oh yeah, pick things up.
carrying things of weight or different, I guess, size and dimension. And then the last would be climbing up onto things.
Wait, I want to back up to the carrying things.
Yeah.
And again, to my like looking for patterns. I noticed this one yesterday. So I had to, the track that I normally go to had some football stuff going on. So I had to go to a different track where I had to park like about 200 yards away. And my bag, I had some extra stuff in my bag. And I realized I always carry my bag on my right shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
So I went, oh, look at that. So I put it on my left shoulder. It's like, huh, it's a really interesting, unusual feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So again, looking for those habits, those
Mm-hmm.
things that you've gotten used to without paying attention
Yeah,
is an interesting thing to explore.
it is. It is interesting to explore. I never really incorporated this into my training. That though very often as trainers we try so hard to be perfectly symmetrical, we're not actually symmetrical beings. But that hasn't really made its way into, or at least that I know of, into like traditional fitness training of how to actually honor our actual asymmetries.
Yeah, I can't. The closest thing I can think of is doing dumbbell stuff instead of barbell stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but even that's a different game.
Yeah.
So, all right. So now we're climbing onto things,
Mm-hmm.
which of course is again for me what led to jumping off of things.
Mm-hmm.
So,
like I said, to a degree, many kids start climbing up stuff before they start walking.
right.
My son started climbing up the stairs before he started walking. Some kids wait quite a while before climbing up on stuff. So that's it's one of those things that it's very dependent on the kid. But now my son is, climbing on climbing walls, and he's climbing up on vertical structures and different things at the playground, which is pretty fun to see, and jumping off of stuff. So he now touched on all of the major kind of macro movement patterns that I theorized on. And the only other one, which I didn't include from a training adults to get back to natural movement standpoint, was like the throwing chopping motion, which I think is there is a ton of value in it now that I explore it more. But in a modern context, not as important for like survival,
right.
As much as it was maybe when you had to throw a spear, chop down your own trees to make houses out of. But it does develop your body in a really unique and useful way, though.
And again, this is one where I actually debate in my own mind about trying whichever one is your opposite side versus just doing the whatever side you prefer best.
Yeah.
I haven't really spent a lot of time trying to throw left-handed. I know as a sprinter, if I try to start with the opposite leg forward, it's just not correct. I mean, not that I can't do it. It's just that I don't have the same kind of power or speed.
Right.
So I don't do it because it has no value to get, ambidextrous in that perspective from that use case. But that's one that I'm kind of curious about.
Yeah.
Especially like chopping motions. That's intriguing to me.
In general, like my question or curiosity with myself with asymmetries is like, am I just not as coordinated because I haven't used this side of my body as much? Or is this actually illuminating like a true physiological deficiency? Like pressing overhead, right? If I can't actually get my arm to vertical versus this one, and that's why my left feels so much weaker, then I'm like, okay, that's illuminating something that might actually be valuable to improve upon versus like the carrying the bag, like carrying an awkward object where you just feel better doing it on the right. That might just be that like from a neuromuscular patterning thing, like your body just isn't used to it and you would quickly catch up on that side.
Yeah. I had shoulder surgery 6 years ago. And so I couldn't use my dominant arm for a couple of months. And I was really surprised. Like I got really good at writing with my left hand. And it's like, that was pretty interesting. Can't do it now.
Yeah.
And I just bought a jacket made in Europe. And so the zipper's on the quote wrong side. And it took me a good 3 months to get comfortable doing that because it was just it's surprising how the little angles make a difference in just zipping something up. And so it literally took me a while, which I thought was pretty funny. Europeans.
Yeah, I was put in I called it the rocket launcher. When you have rotator cuff surgery, they often put you in that sling that has like the huge pad that keeps your arm off the body.
Yeah.
And so I got the pleasure of being in the rocket launcher. We actually, shoulder surgery is extremely common in wrestling. So there was even a running joke of like, we all passed on the same like rocket launcher to each other as wrestlers on our college team. But yeah, same thing. I started to get really good at doing stuff with my left hand that I never even thought to do with my left before that.
Again, HR violation that I'm not doing. So we've gone through all these patterns. We've gone through ways that people can explore playing with them to see what you find. And I would probably bet that the one people least want to do is probably the one most valuable. It's just my hunch. And or the one that you think you're the worst at, probably the best one to play with, and just find a way to do it. Anything else? We got to wrap this up badly, but anything else that we need to do to kind of bring this in for a landing?
Well, one big one that I do a lot of and has gotten a lot of kind of publicity and awareness around is through the context of climbing up things, the hanging piece. And I'm such a huge proponent of hanging, and I actually like hanging from gymnastics rings the best. So I even just like did a post of like, one of my favorite life hacks right now is putting gymnastics rings outside and just hanging from them and twisting and just seeing how many different things you can do, not even from the context of working out, but just like hanging and getting in different positions.
Come over to my house.
We'll head over to your house.
I got 2 sets hanging outside.
There you go. But hanging is just, it's just so good for you.
Yeah.
Even if you don't understand why, it's just so good for you. All the tissues that it stretches and the things that it opens up for you, and your grip strength is directly correlated with lifespan. And there's just on and on. But if I can just end with one thing, is like start hanging from things. Go with your kid onto the playground and hang from the bars. Do the monkey bars. Hang from a tree. Gymnastics rings. Hang more.
I like it. Brilliant. So, Brian, if people want to get in touch with you, find out more about what you're doing, find out about your company and the products that you have, please let them know how to do that.
So the company is committedhp.com. So 2 M's and 2 T's in committed. People get that wrong very often. So committedhp.com. This is the mobile roller. This is the full size. The travel size is just shorter in length, but the balls are exactly the same. Phenomenal product. Just like Stephen shared with me, it's one of those products, once you get on it, you're like, wow, like I'm so glad I got on this thing. Personally, comfortable giving out one of my emails. So
here's my phone number. Here's my social security number.
bryan@committedhp.com is the one email I'm comfortable putting out there. And so I'm transitioning into transformational life coaching is the main thing that I'm focusing on, as well as sound therapy. And I'm sure we could geek out on that, but happy to still explore the movement through the context of just making yourself the best version of you can make.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. It's been a total pleasure. I mean, we've been trying to make this happen for a while, so I'm glad we did by you storming the office. And so for everyone else, A, thanks. B, reach out to Brian. I'm sure you'll get value out of that. And C, remember to go to www.jointhemovementmovement.com to find previous episodes, all the ways to engage with us. And if you have any requests or suggestions, anyone you think should be on the show, whatever floats your boat, anything you want to share with me, just drop me an email, MOVE at jointhemovementmovement.com. And most importantly, between now and whatever's next, go out, have fun, and live life feet first.